As we meet today for this CWI meeting on the situation and the struggles in Latin America, the results of the second round of the election in Peru have been announced. And it looks like the left candidate, Pedro Castillo, a teachers' union leader, has edged ahead. But it also looks like the right-wing candidate potentially is looking to do a Trump and try and overturn the election. So it looks very much like there is going to be a stormy period ahead in Peru, with struggle both legally and on the streets. And as we know, turbulence is not unusual across this whole important continent of Latin America. In fact, it's the norm as country after country sees the crisis of capitalism evolving and everything that means for the lives of the working class and youth there. Economic crisis predominates, accompanied as always by unemployment, hunger and inequality, and political crisis too, as the traditional parties, the establishment parties, have proved themselves completely unable to solve the problems facing the working class and the youth and the poor there, and very often corruption a factor as well. And also struggle is a major feature in the continent. We saw that before the COVID pandemic with the huge heroic movement of the youth in Chile, and we've seen it since as well. And all of the problems, all of the difficulties, all of the crisis has been accelerated by the COVID pandemic itself and the murderous failings of government after government to deal with it. So the need for a socialist program and a strategy to take a movement in Peru, in Mexico, in Brazil, in Chile forward to defeat right-wing reaction and capitalism is going to be posed very sharply. Internationally, the CWI, that is the Committee for a Workers' International, a world socialist organization, is fighting for working class organization as a key part of what is needed, building fighting trade unions, but also putting forward the need for a new mass workers' parties. So these are some of the issues that we are going to be looking at today. And to discuss these things, we are joined by Patricio Guzman. Unfortunately, we may not be able to get Patricio's picture up on the Zoom, but we're hoping that we can hear from him. And he's going to be speaking to us from Socialism Revolucionario in Chile. And also we're joined by Tony Saunois from the Committee for a Workers' International. So Patricio, I'm going to start with you after the Peru election. As I said, it looks like this has been a victory, a narrow victory of the left candidate, Pedro Castillo, and the new party, Peru Libre. And this represents a massive polarization that has swept the country. Can you say a bit about the significance of this victory and also what it represents in terms of a wave of new left radicalization?
Well, the victory is really huge in political terms. It's the victory of a trade unionist, rural teacher leader outside all the political caste apparatus. It's a big, it's a big shout of disappointment of the people, of the Peruvian people, against all the parties, against the corrupt parties. Now, I think Peru now is in the verge of a revolutionary situation. The Peru Libre Party is a socialist party. According with his program, he is really a revolutionary socialist party. The candidate himself is not a member of the party, was presented by the party. This is a difference. And all during his campaign, he was attacked by the right wing and by Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of the dictator, the bloody dictator of Peru, Alberto Fujimori. She blamed Pedro Castillo as a communist. And she said, this is not simply communist. It's not Venezuela or Cuba. It's North Korean communist. You may think that it's a kind of funny political attack. But in a country like Peru, where they were through a bloody conflict between the state and the Sendero Luminoso, that was a faction of the Communist Peruvian Party, but a very ultra-left, I would say Pol Potist left of the party, that commit many, many crimes and open the door to the army to commit more crimes, murders, but also 300,000 people, most of them women, that were forcibly sterilized. Only to show two things, it was a very terrible period. So that accusation has some force in the Peruvian society. Now, the Peru Libre Party is a party that was formed in the inner regions of Peru, where Pedro Castillo have votation of 80% or more sometimes, but it's very, I would say, not present in the big concentrations population like Lima, where Fujimori was the candidate that won. This is the main difficulty for Pedro Castillo. But of course, from the government, they can, with socialist basic policies in favor of the population, they can change the situation very quickly. And the right wing, I'm not talking just of political organization, but also the bourgeoisie, the imperialist enterprises, and the army are very concerned about that. So to finish, in spite of what they say, and Pedro Castillo is also trying to show his more moderate face, Peru is clearly in the verge of a political revolutionary situation. And Peru Libre, that was a very small party, now is becoming a mass broad party. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you, Patricio. It's hard to know when you're finishing when I can't see your face, but I think that's been very useful. And I just point out people who are watching to the website of the CWI, the socialistworld.net, where you can read articles that give you a bit of a background picture, a picture of the election as well. And hopefully we'll be getting more material on that as well now, and following those developments as we go forward. Patricia, I want to ask you another question, if that's okay, because in Chile also we've seen a massive defeat for the right in the recent elections to the Constituent Convention. What are the likely consequences in the struggle in Chile?
Well, in Chile, the main point that was for the Constituent Assembly, that is a limited assembly, limited by a law in the Congress. I will explain a little bit, but in this new Camera that will elaborate the new constitution, the traditional political parties were also defeated. There are a big quantity of people now there that were outside the political parties, that call themselves independent. Most of them can be situated in the left. So the far left of this assembly is very consistent. There are a lot of confusions also, I don't want to exaggerate. But the main problem is in the new constitution, there are some things they cannot change or discuss. They cannot change anything related to international treaties, and that's very important for the Chilean economy and Chilean society. Second, they cannot discuss things related other powers of the state. That means judicial power and the army, and they have a quantity of votes elevated to two-thirds in order to approve any article. The right was very sure that they will have at least 1/3 to block anything, but they haven't. So now they are in a kind of panic state. And of course, now during the year, this assembly will be discussing, there will be I would say, a very broad politicization of the society, discussing all these things. The situation before now, and everything is a product of the mass movement from October 2019 on, is change in Chile. We also live in a radicalized to the left society in different degrees. That's, I think it's the main things I can tell you.
Thank you, Patricio. Tony, I'll turn to you now, because you've spent many years traveling to Latin America and working with, the CWI sections there. We're now seeing these major upheavals throughout the continent. How do you see these events and their likely outcome in the next period? And also, can you include in that a bit about Brazil maybe as well? We've got Bolsonaro there, who obviously has faced mass struggle since he was elected, but also has held on. What role is he going to play in the stormy period that Latin America is facing now?
Well, I think, Sarah, you've touched on some important points there, and as has Patricio, particularly in relation to Peru and Chile, because I think in both cases, as with other cases of the events that have taken place, what we are seeing is a new resurgence of a radical movement. You had this massive movement in Chile, and the Constituent Convention, which is now, we've seen the elections, the routing of the traditional parties in Chile, is a product of the mass movement taking place there. We've seen a whole series of movements against the former presidents in Peru in the run-up to these elections. If I remember rightly, I think 3 presidents have been overthrown or removed in the course of the last 12 or 18 months prior to this particular election. And then you add on to that the catastrophic crisis which is developing in Mexico, where you've also seen elections where AMLO, the so-called left populist, or he's not a bit more populist than left when he's actually been in power, has scored a little bit of a victory in the sense that while he lost his 2/3 majority, there's been he's held on to a majority in the Congress. And added to that, you've had this phenomenal movement which has taken place in Colombia, which is of intense and crucial importance. We've had big protests now taking place in Brazil against the Bolsonaro government. And really, if you look at the whole continent, it's in convulsion. There's not one country on the continent which is stable, which has often been the case in Latin America, but it's now gone onto a new level and a new wave of the position. I mean, it's a revolutionary movement. As Patricio said, there's at least a pre-revolutionary situation is in the process of opening up in Peru, which this election results is indicative from. And by the way, that is also very important, because this party, this victory, unlike some of the other new left parties or so-called new left parties which have emerged internationally, this has been the product of social struggle, and it's been the product of the strike of the teachers, which has been crucial in terms of catapulting Castillo into the presidency. Whether the right wing are going to accept that, they look like they're going to challenge it legally. They'll do a Trump. Don't rule out, by the way, they'll go further than a legal challenge, and they might even attempt some sort of military intervention. It's going to open up a whole crisis within Peruvian society, which is already there. And in Colombia, it's a massive movement. It's over a month. We've seen mass protests, general strikes, barricades are going up. as a product of the coronavirus, the effect of that, of the collapse in the economy, the poverty, the killings which have been taking place under the government there. We had the so-called peace accord with the guerrillas, which in effect the government's regaded on, and it's triggered this massive movement. And as many of the protesters say, the biggest killer in Colombia at the moment is not the coronavirus, it's the Colombian state in terms of the brutal repression which has been dished out over a whole period. And by the way, in the war, as Patricio correctly said in relation to Peru, one of the key factors you've got to take into account is the terrible misery suffered by people during the Sendero Luminoso war, the Maoist conflict, which had a certain Pol Pot type element, which had a terrible effect in terms of the effects on the left, in terms of the workers' movement, and of course gave the right the excuse to carry out absolutely brutal, repression. And that is an important element in the situation, as indeed you see in relation to Colombia with the effect of the war there. I mean, there's 260,000 people at least killed during the civil war, which took place involving the FARC. And Colombia has the highest rate of trade union assassinations by paramilitary organizations of any country in the world. And it's this marvelous movement which has developed, as we've seen in relation to Peru, as we're going to see in relation to Peru following the elections as well. And the key question is how the movement is organized, is drawn together. That's the most important thing. Are there going to be action committees, democratically elected, drawn together to work out a real program of struggle and a strategy and tactics to carry these movements forward? And in the case of Peru, to actually carry forward the movements to defend the government if Castillo is actually sworn in, and to carry out the program, the reforms that he was promising, although it's mixed messages, as Patricio indicated, where he put a more moderate face on, defending the role of the market in the economy, despite the fact the party stands for nationalisation of key sections of the economy and other important reforms. But it can open up a whole revolutionary upsurge, and you see that also now beginning to take place in relation to the key country really in Latin America, and that is in Brazil. Bolsonaro is in trouble, and it's a devastating crisis which is taking place there. You now see the protests taking place, which have been very sizable against Bolsonaro. He's behind in the opinion polls now. You have Lula from the PT will be ahead in the opinion polls and will probably win the elections if you get to elections. And it's against the background, though, of this massive social and economic crisis. And really what you have in Brazil is a partial implosion has taken place. There's always been elements of it there, but it's been intensified during the crisis. If you take some of the reports that are coming out from Rio at this stage, in reality you have shadow state machines operating. Certainly in the favelas, you have the militias, which are like organized gangs. They're not the drug cartels, but they're powerful militias, like a mafia type organization, and they operate like a shadow state, sometimes with the blessing of the state. They actually stop drug dens functioning, and drug addicts can be driven out in some of them. But they're like a mafia organization, and they actually play the role of a parallel state. They're fully armed with massive weapons. They provide the internet, cable companies, gas supplies, water supplies, electricity supplies. All of this is done through, in some of the favelas, is done through these militias, which are mafia-type organizations. But it's a measure of the collapse which is taking place. And this crisis has had a devastating effect. Over 41% increase in poverty has dramatically affected. Millions been plunged into poverty in Brazil at this particular stage. 35 million school children have not had any education in primary school for 15 months. I mean, the social consequences of what this is going to mean are going to be absolutely devastating. 18 million fall further into the poverty line, and it's an explosive situation. Now, what's going to happen? The ruling class never wanted Bolsonaro in power in general. You have these protests. In the run-up to the elections, though, Lula's out ahead on the opinion polls, but he's built in a whole series of powerful basis support Bolsonaro has within the state machine, and it's not clear how the position will fully pan out. What the consequences will be if Bolsonaro attempts to do a Trump, only more so in the run-up to the elections. I mean, you've already seen in 2020, he was preparing and argued in his government to use the military to disband the Supreme Court, to send the army against the Supreme Court. It was actually the generals that held him back on that. The commanders in chief of all of the main armed forces have resigned, but nevertheless, it's left a bit of a vacuum in the sense that he has powerful bases of support within the military, which he refers to as my army. And don't rule out that he won't try to invoke that and use it to cling onto power. What the consequences of that will be, because the ruling class per se would not necessarily want that or don't want that, and it's going to trigger a mass movement. But what we see throughout all of these movements is a resurgence taking place. And the instructive point is, it's a point that CWI has emphasized over a number of years, it illustrates a crucial point, because you had a series of left governments came to power. Lula in the past in Brazil was a sort of centre-left, Chavez in Venezuela, Ecuador, you had it, Morales in Bolivia, and they failed. They didn't confront and overthrow capitalism, and they paved the way for the election of a series of right-wing governments. But as we pointed out at the time, they were governments coming to power on the basis of a protest vote, of the failure of the left, not indicating a clear ideological swing to the right. And now you see, intensified by the pandemic, of course, a new resurgence of the struggle against these right-wing governments. And now we possibly have the prospect of a new cycle of the left coming to power. The key question is, will these new forces that are emerging learn the lessons of what happened previously when you had the pink tide, as it was dubbed, sweep the continent? But it's going to be on a higher level, a more intensified level of struggle in the course of the next period. And that is why Peru is so important, because it's this new party which has exploded, and it's the coming to power of this left candidate. What it happens now can open up a whole new period of struggle, maybe a little bit similar with important differences to what we saw in Chile between 70 and 73 under the Allende government. So it's a whole continent in revolt, in reality, is what we're seeing, and which is plunged into crisis.
Thanks, Tony. And I think in this new period of a new level of instability, we are going to want to and need to draw the lessons from some of that experience of that red tide, that pink tide. So I am going to come back to you on that in a moment. But I just want to come back to you, Patricio, first about the emergence of this new party, the Peru Libre. Earlier on, you called it a socialist party, and Tony has referred to how it was a party that emerged from and was produced with class struggle in the mix there. So can you tell us a bit about what is its programme? And also, what about in other countries in Latin America? Are new parties of the working class posed? Is that going to be a feature of this new period of struggle and instability that we're discussing?
Well, as Tony before me just said, the continent is crossing through a wave of political radicalization and especially mass protest movement. The big one now is in Colombia. But going back to Peru, Peru Libre was a party founded first as a political movement in the inner and more poor region of the country, around the charismatic leadership of Vladimir Cerón. He's a doctor, a high-profile doctor of medicine, neurosurgery. He was formed in Cuba, and he declared himself a Marxist.
Hello, Patricia. Oh,
now do you listen?
Yes, no, I'm listening. I wasn't sure if you were finished or pausing or we'd lost you.
No. The party has an action program that's clearly socialist. It proclaimed himself Marxist, Leninist, Mariateguist, and he's for the nationalization of all the high economic sectors of the society, etc. Now, a party is not just its program, it's also its class conformation, the class conformation of the leadership, and its real actions. So it is going very young, but it's going to have a big proof now. If he arrives to the government, what will the party do? They don't have a majority in the Congress, for example. So if they reduce themselves only to the traditional government practices without a big appeal to the organization from down of the masses, we cannot expect much. On the contrary, they have the opportunity to revolt the whole Peruvian society. But that's something we'll need to watch. Of course, I think we need to be in solidarity with Peru Libre and Castillo government, because it will be attacked for all the reactionary right-wing sectors, not just the political one, but also in the army, in the economic sector, etc.
Thanks, Patricio. So Tony, just thinking about what Patricio is saying there about the establishment and the building and the future of Peru Libre, and also the potential for other new mass workers' party across the continent. Let's look back a little at that recent past that you mentioned earlier on this important continent, because it was defined by a period of upheaval as well, wasn't it? When we saw that red and that pink wave sweeping the continent, like you mentioned, Chavez in Venezuela, Morales in Bolivia, Lula in Brazil and others, and millions across the world looked to those events. And yet history has moved on, like you mentioned, but it's really important, isn't it, that we draw all the lessons from that period for building the struggles to come. What are those key lessons?
Well, I think that it's crucial because of the new wave that we're in, because it's quite possible we're going to see not only election victory at the left in Peru, which we obviously welcome, maybe in other countries as well. I mean, you're going to probably have some form of Lula administration back in Brazil, and maybe some others. The key question in many countries, though, like in Chile at the moment, there is no organised, sizable party at the left, the socialist left, in most countries. That's true in Colombia at this stage, and that is a crucial task which is posed. But one of the there's two real points, I think, that I would draw out from the previous wave, because you had two elements of it. One was the Chavez wing, the sort of more radical wing, as it was called, of this wave. Morales to an extent, in Ecuador as well. Then you had, of course, the Lula factor in Brazil, and they were different. The revolutionary process went a lot further in Venezuela and Bolivia, and let's remember, Bolivia almost came to the point of a civil war in terms of the right seceding, and were preparing to take up arms against the MAS Morales party. But the left came to power, and they carried out significant reforms to start with, particularly in Venezuela in the initial period, and also in Bolivia as well. And it had an enormous effect in terms of encouraging workers and the youth, but there was always an underlying problem in both cases, and that was fundamentally they did not take the decisive measures to break decisively with capitalism. Morales tried to establish his peace. He was lucky; he had an economic boom for a period, so he could introduce a series of reforms. And he had a paradox. While under Morales, initially they were prepared to take up arms, or the far right, to try and defeat Morales. The paradox was, once he was in power, He stabilized the situation in Bolivia, and under his presidency, you probably had one of the most stable periods of Bolivian history because of the economic situation. And he secured it in a sense for capitalism. They wanted him out at the end, and they organized a coup de facto to get rid of him. But nevertheless, that is what he did. But there was, and the same thing in a sense was repeated in Venezuela. They encroached on capitalism, but they didn't abolish it and overthrow it. And he still left the capitalist class in power. That left them room to sabotage. It left them room to organize an opposition. And then it was particularly in Venezuela, but there was a big element of it in Bolivia as well. It was the top-down bureaucratic methods which were employed, but there wasn't a genuine development of conscious democratic workers' control in the factories, of democratic workers' control of the state enterprises, and the genuine introduction of a democratic socialist plan under workers' control and management. You had this bureaucratic mass develop, which in the case of Venezuela in particular became riddled with grotesque corruption, reinforced by the blockade from US imperialism as well. And you have a social catastrophe in Venezuela, and it opened the way for the right to pull off the coup. Now they've been defeated again back in Bolivia, but they did it, and that was the crucial lesson. And similarly, you could say it was the lessons in other countries as well. In the case of Brazil under Lula, it was a somewhat different process. He was very lucky. He came to power on the basis of a commodities boom, which enabled him to give quite a lot of concessions. Living standards rose quite dramatically. Poverty levels under the Lula period initially fell by about 41%, but it was on the basis of the accumulation of massive credit. It had an effect on living standards for millions. Universities were built, schools were built, had a certain significant effect for an important layer. You have reports, millions for the first time were buying a car, millions for the first time were getting on an aeroplane, but it was based on debt, credit. And as the PT became more and more embroiled in the state machine, embroiled in corruption, the commodities boom, which both Brazil and Lula had, and Morales have been able to base themselves on, that collapsed, and with it all of the reforms went as well. And that laid the basis with Dilma in Brazil, then for the coming back for Bolsonaro to step in on the basis of disillusionment, of disgust, of alienation, and it allowed Bolsonaro to step in that particular case. And the key lesson we have now, I think, is twofold. One is to learn the lessons. If you want, you can't make your peace with capitalism and have a halfway position. That was, the essence of the issue. Many of the lessons of the Allende government of 70 to 73 are going to be drawn out now in relation to Peru and what needs to be done. A breaking with capitalism, of organising a mass movement, not being imprisoned and relying on the state institutions, building a mass movement of democratic elected committees of the workers, the peasants, of the poor, bringing them together to organise the taking over of industry, the nationalisation and establish a genuine government of the workers, the peasants and the poor to break decisively with capitalism. And as a step towards that is the crucial question of building new parties. And that's why it's so significant what's happened in Peru. How it develops, we have to see. But it is an important step along the way. What happens in Brazil now? Lula's ahead, but he's in the PT, which the capitalist class or sections of the capitalist class think they can rely on. They're not fully confident on that, but they think they can rely on it based on their past, their position. We have the emergence of PSOL a number of years ago, which is crucial, and that has a crucial role now. And what has it to do? It, of course, because of the election system, is possible. PSOL should present the presidential candidate in the first round of the election, undoubtedly, to lay its marker down and prepare for what will happen under a Lula government, which will maybe introduce some partial reforms, will correct some of the madness that Bolsonaro has implemented, but it's not going to break with capitalism, and it's a question of preparing them for a struggle for that. So in the first round, PSOL should stand. There's a debate taking place in PSOL about what it should do at this stage. In our view, it should stand in the first round. In the second round, go for a vote against Bolsonaro, which will be entirely justified, and then prepare for the struggle that will take place later. But the key thing is the lessons that are drawn out of building democratic committees of struggle, for a national strategy to fight for a government of the workers, the peasants, and a program to break with capitalism, and the crucial question of building new parties where applicable for the working class to carry through those tasks.
Thanks, Tony. Right, I'm going to finish with a question for both of you, really, for those watching. So, following on from all that you've said, what are the tasks now facing the working class and youth and poor across the continent? What programme does the CWI offer to those workers and youth in struggle and those who are going to move into struggle to fight for a future free from the chaos of capitalism and imperialism that has brought the misery and the suffering that you've both touched on today? So do you want to start off, Patricio, in terms of that, the programme that the CWI offers?
Well, the situation of the continent is an emergency situation, especially not just by capitalism and the developed capitalism we have always, but now with COVID, it's really dramatic. The number of the people, the number of infected people, but especially the complete deorganization of the economy. That means that the statistics of poverty, of vulnerability are ramping up incredibly. But so the main immediate measures are to take complete full control of the main industries and the social security system that was partially, some case totally privatized before COVID, and that's one of the reasons of the catastrophe. And then to help to organize a big, broad mass movement of workers and poor people. There are some countries like Peru where now poverty, and you have to understand that what they call official poverty is extreme poverty, is officially around 90% of the population. So the afterwar of the COVID will be a very dramatic situation, because we hope the pandemic will stop in some moment in the near future, but the economic consequences will stay unless we really take all the economy and society through a complete socialist reconstruction. That's what the people need. Is an ideological point of view of us. It's a need. The problem is we now don't have the leadership with the confidence to do that. So we also need to organize at the same path, big mass organization, big mass working class parties. It's all at the same time. What is happening now in Colombia also shows another problem we need to confront, is the corruption, because the bourgeoisie in Latin America is also a very corrupt class. In Colombia in particular, they are intermediate with the cartel of drug. One of the three main cities in Colombia is Cali. Cali is the capital of the Pacific side of the country. And near Cali, there's the port of Buenaventura. Buenaventura is the main export port of the drug cartels, where they export mainly to the United States, cocaine and heroin. And that explains a lot why the repression in Cali has been so murderous. And not just by the official police of the army now, but also by the paramilitary groups. They are groups related with the mafia. The people has blocked the highways. the export of drugs is paralyzed. Well, but this is also a main confrontation for a socialist policy in Latin America. We need to stop corruption. In a corrupt country, you can't expect much. So we need to stop the corrupt mafia bourgeoisie. Without doing that, it's impossible to go forward. That's my view.
Thanks, Patricio, and to you, Tony, as well. What program, what points on the program do you think it's important to highlight today from the CWI's program?
I think really there's two aspects of it. One is the immediate program for the mass movements of struggle. Colombia, what we've had in Chile, and by the way, in Chile it's not over yet. We see what happens. It's a very interesting point Patricio made there about what the Constitutional Convention can and cannot discuss. It can't touch the army, it can't touch the judiciary, it can't touch foreign trade agreements. Pretty important points, so it's going to be limited. There will be some points undoubtedly come through, but I mean, there's a struggle still to be had there. And I mean, it is, you have an utterly degenerate ruling class. And by the way, that is now an international feature of the capitalist class, the degree of corruption and rottenness that's there. It is true, it is probably worse in Latin America. Well, it's probably no worse in Latin America than Asia or Africa, but I mean, it's a major issue in terms of the corruption that is there. And by the way, every president since Fujimori, who went out, I think in 2000, was when he was his last period enough. Every president in Peru has been imprisoned for corruption or is dead. Alan Garcia was arrested for corruption and shot himself. And I mean, it's just one after another. I mean, it's just the scale of corruption is phenomenal. The degree of corruption in Brazil, the car wash scandal. I mean, you're not talking a few million being pocketed. We're talking billions. They have a whole department in one company to organise the distribution of the corrupt money. I mean, it's incredible. It's like parallel state machines in Mexico, in particular. I mean, it's true what Patricio says about Colombia, obviously. But in Mexico, sections of the bourgeoisie, they're interchangeable with the narco drug cartels. They're part of it in reality. And it requires a whole action program to deal with that. And by the way, a critical question, and that's there posed now in Colombia, it will be posed probably in Peru as well, is the question of action committees, democratically elected from the workplaces, in the neighborhoods, elected delegates subject to recall with assemblies to come together to work out a concrete program of direct action and struggle, including, by the way, the formation, where appropriate, of democratic defense committees, because the attacks on the mass movement by the state machine and paramilitaries and the right wing is a crucial element which is emerging in these movements. The movement to come together with a national assembly of some sort or such bodies to prepare a real struggle for a general strike to overthrow the government, or in the case of Peru, if Castillo gets to the point of being the president, such a body to ensure that he can carry through his program and to take it further to break with capitalism. Now that's particularly where you have these mass movements. Beyond that, it is the crucial question of organisation, of building fighting combative trade unions, as is a task internationally, but above all of establishing real viable parties of the working class with a program. And it is a question then of not just having the program correctly on paper. This party in Peru, Peru Libre, I mean, formally, it seems to have a good program. Defends Marxism, defends Leninism. Mariaki from Peru, who's got a very important historical figure from the Peruvian communist movement, develops some very interesting ideas on the permanent revolution in relation to the indigenous peoples as well. Had a bit of a checkered history as far as the struggle between Stalin and Trotsky was concerned. A wrong position on that, but nevertheless is an important figure. Those issues are there to be discussed and to debate it out. But nevertheless, the program to break with capitalism, you don't do it by trying to appease, and compromise them. And unfortunately, that's one of the lessons that we have from all of the movements that took place during the Pink Revolution and historically in relation to into that of not appeasing capitalism and not going into blocks and to coalitions and with the capitalist parties or their shadows, which is the road to disaster. So it's a question of looking for a rounded out program of a revolutionary socialist character and building parties that are capable of implementing that. And a crucial element of that is, of course, the struggles in each country, but then linking those struggles together across the continent. And in Latin America, that is, is a crucial task, but one which is there, with common cultural interests. There's vast differences between the different countries of Latin America, but there is a common culture there with language, etc., and the prospect to unify the movement and pose the idea of the need for a socialist federation of the continent, of the working class linking up on a continental basis, is also one of the crucial tasks that will be posed in this movement in order to defeat the ruling class and to defeat imperialism. And that, of course, is what the CWI is looking towards, assembling those forces in the course of the coming period.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Patricio, and especially thanks to Patricio for persevering to stay with us despite the technical challenges that have been posed for us today. And thank everybody for joining us. And just on what Tony was raising just there at the end, if you want to be part of not just discussing these ideas, and obviously discussing them is important, but of fighting for these ideas, which is absolutely necessary, then we do encourage you to get in touch via socialistworld.net, get in touch with the Committee for Workers International to find out about how you can discuss with socialists in your area, or discuss how to build socialist struggle in your area, because that's what we need. We need fighters who are going to defend these ideas, defend the confidence in the role of the working class as the agent of socialist change that can fight for the liberation from oppression of all the oppressed masses, fight for the end of the economic and social crisis that capitalism brings and is only going to bring more of. So if you've watched this video and you've enjoyed it, we ask that you share it. We ask that you sign up to the Socialist World Facebook page to find out Socialist World-CWI Facebook page. That will let you know what the next of the series of video discussions is going to be on, and also that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is CWI Media, because there you can see all the previous and all the future videos that we're going to be recording. So that's your tasks following on from this video. If you've enjoyed it, share it, look out for future videos, but most importantly, get in touch, find out about joining the struggle for socialism where you live. That's what we need to do. That's what the key lesson of today's discussion, I think, has been. We face a future of upheaval, and our job is to build the forces of socialist ideas that can help to build those mass movements and mass new workers' parties that are absolutely necessary. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Patricio. Thanks, Tony. See you next time. Solidarity.